important meeting in Fed history. Maybe the U.S. Central Bank is expected to announce in the next move to boost the faltering economic recovery. There's the lie. Oh, they want to fix it. Oh, they want to help you. In their next move to try to fix the faltering economy and recovery, to say that there has been considerable debate and anxiety among Fed watchers about what the central bank should do would be an understatement. Chairman Ben Bernanke has indicated in recent speeches that the central bank plans to try to drive down already low interest rates by buying up long-term bonds. A number of people, both inside the Fed and out, believe that this is the wrong move. But one website seems to believe that Ben's plan might actually lead to armed conflict. And I didn't click on that link. Will you guys click on that link there in the second paragraph and see what website they're talking about? I think they're talking about Zero Hedge. Last week, the blog Zero Hedge wrote, paraphrasing a top economic forecaster, David Rosenberg, that it believes the Fed's plan is not only moronic, but positions U.S. solely one step closer to civil war, if not worse. We just read British economists saying the same thing. I'm not sure what "if not worse" means is supposed to mean. If not worse than civil war. But with the Tea Party gaining followers, the idea of civil war over economic issues doesn't seem that far-fetched these days, and Ron Paul definitely thinks the Fed should be ended. In Time's recent cover story on the militia movement, many said these groups are powder kegs looking for a catalyst. Oh, so see, it's not the bankers' fault doing this to us. It's the militias, and it's Tea Parties, and it's gun owners. They are the threats, see? But don't worry, the Army's waiting and been quietly training for that. They'll make sure the bankers can really take over. So why not a Fed Policy Committee meeting? Still, I'm not convinced we're headed towards Fedmageddon. That being said, the Fed's early November meeting is an important one. Here's why. Usually there is generally a consensus about what the Federal Reserve should do. When the economy is weak, the Fed cuts short-term interest rates to spur borrowing and economic activity. When the economy is strong and inflation is rising, it does the opposite. But nearly 2 years after the Fed cut short-term interest rates basically to zero, well, for the banks it's zero, for you it's 30%, more and more economists are questioning whether the U.S. Central Bank is making the right moves. It's making the right moves to destroy the economy and consolidate power and hyperinflate the currency. I mean, right move for them, record bonuses. Stock market down, banks up. That was the Bloomberg headline yesterday. The economy is still very weak and unemployment seems stubbornly stuck near 10%. How about 22? Time magazine. The problem is the Fed only directs short-term interest rates, and they are already about as close to zero as you can go. That's why Ben Bernanke has been recently talking about something called quantitative easing. That's when they monetize the debt. That's when the Fed basically creates money to buy the long-term bonds that it doesn't directly control and drive down those interest rates as well. That should further reduce the cost of borrowing for large companies and homeowners. Because the banks aren't loaning. Some people are calling it QE2 because the Fed made a similar move during the height of the financial crisis when it bought mortgage bonds. Not everybody agrees with this move. In fact, a number of presidents of regional Fed banks, not all of which get to vote on Fed policy meetings, have recently come out against Bernanke's plans. Some say it sets bad policy. Others think it will stoke inflation, which might be the point. Well, yeah, the Fed said they want to use inflation to pay off the debt. Few, though, have warned of armed conflict. Here's how Zero Hedge justifies its prediction of how the Fed's November 3rd meeting will lead to violence. And they have a link to that. And it goes on. In a very real sense, Bernanke is throwing Granny and Grandpa down the stairs on purpose. He is literally threatening those at the lower end of the economic strata, along with all who are retired, with starvation and death. And in a just nation where the rule of law controlled instead of being abused by kleptocrats, that's thieving politicians, he would be facing charges of seditious conspiracy, as his policies will inevitably lead to the destruction of our republic. I agree. Okay, the idea that Bernanke will kill large swaths of low-income neighborhoods or Florida by his plan to further lower interest rates is a little ridiculous. Hyperinflation won't hurt people already on the verge of starving, you mean? You don't know about that, Time magazine? But there is a point in Zero Hedge's craze. Lower rates do tend to favor borrowers over savers. And the largest borrowers in the country are banks, speculators, and large corporations. Yeah, they get it for close to zero. The largest spenders in the country, though, tend to be individuals. Consumer spending makes up 70% of the economy, and the vast majority of consumers are on the low end of income scale. So I think it's a valid question to ask whether the Fed's desire to drive down interest rates at all cost, and it goes on. Companies are already borrowing at low rates. They are just not spending. That being said, civil war, probably not. It is a gross exaggeration, says Alan Meltzer, who is a top Fed historian at Carnegie Mellon. I cannot recall ever learning about riots or civil war, even when the Fed made other mistakes. Not a mistake. When I called David Rosenberg, he was traveling and couldn't talk, but he did send me a quick email to stress that he never, ever suggested that any moves the Fed makes will lead to militia uprising. No, he talked about protesting and disintegration of society. Some smart people, though, including Metzler, it appears, and Rosenberg, do think the path of quantitative easing that the Fed looks likely to embark on is the wrong move. John Taylor, a top Fed scholar at Stanford, says eventually you will have to pull the support out. And when you do it a year from now, and when the economy is recovering, he thinks it could be quantitatively disruptive. And quite disruptive. So even if you don't double dip now, we've never left the dips. This is all just baloney. You might double dip then. And even if you don't, it would make for a slow recovery. Others, such as, and it goes through some more economists, who has become famous for warning about the possibility of financial crisis back in 2005, believes low interest rates could be creating new bubbles in, say, gold and other commodities. So it seems clear that the Fed is likely to do. How the economy, the militias, and the rest of us react is up in the air. The countdown is on. T-minus 15 days to Fedmageddon. See you there, hopefully. So I'm not a newsreader, but I babbled through that entire article, and it's just a bunch of tripe, basically. But there is Time Magazine. Will the Federal Reserve cause civil war? Well, look at what's happening over in Europe. Nicolas Sarkozy calls for calm as French pension protests gather pace. Cars burned, shop windows smashed, and 4,000 petrol stations awaiting supplies on sixth day of French protest. And it goes on to report that the strikes and giant protests are now accelerating. The country is now grinding to a halt. France 24 TV reports violent protests have weakened unions in retirement battle. And that's the Paul Joseph Watson article, basically breaks that down in more detail, showing that clearly many of these anarchists are working with the police. Here's another one. Rioters rampage. Protesters block French airports. Workers opposed to higher retirement age blocked access to airports in Paris and around the country on Wednesday as hooded youths smashed store windows amid clouds of tear gas outside the capital. So the real protesters are blocking airports and petrol stations. All you got to do is, 20 of you get together and park your cars and take the keys out. Others join you. You get 100 cars blocking the road, then 1,000 cars blocking the road. It's over. You just leave, and your car's there. And there's no way they can even get to it to tow it out of there. That ends it right there. You just walk off. But having the little anarchists run by the big foundations on record, smashing store windows, setting private cars on fire, beating up people, that is government funded. And all they got to do is get the first vanguard doing it, who are government funded, then other useful idiots and ne'er-do-wells, they join in with the overall operation. Okay, I'm going to take calls and cover other economic and political news throughout the next hour and 10 minutes. And we got a guest in studio. Stay with us.